Hello, everybody. My name is Jan Turek. I am employed within the Center for Theoretical Studies of Charles University in Prague, and I have been the academic secretary of World Archaeological Congress in Prague this summer, where we had the plenary session on the Russian invasion of Ukraine and discussed the first ideas about how to help and support our Ukrainian colleagues. So I have to express my great gratitude to our colleagues to organize this a charity conference, and it's a great honor for me to contribute and support the idea, which is so important in this moment. So I will start with sharing my screen. For the 3D History for Ukraine conference, I've prepared a topic which is basically touching the whole European continent from the Western Europe up to the Ukraine, and showing the similarities in the archaeological record, and also showing how the prehistoric society was interlinked within the whole continent, and last but not least, how Ukraine was always attached to the uh, development of prehistoric civilization in Europe, even so being a kind of bridge to the Central Asia, to the Far East. But Ukraine is and was in the Neolithic times a crucial area for communication in Europe. And as such, it should be also considered at the present day. So we'll start with this topic in British Isles. This is the most famous, perhaps the most famous prehistoric architecture in the world, the Stonehenge. And I quite often, students in England were asking, Stonehenge, why Stonehenge again? And they just perceived Stonehenge as something rather boring, something rather always discussed, always presented, and with no further story behind. But I would rather say, instead of Stonehenge with question mark, I would say Stonehenge with exclamation mark, as Stonehenge is not only a remarkable piece of architecture, which is until present day still carrying certain spiritual power, and drawing attention of people throughout the millennia until the present day. But also, Stonehenge is not an isolated monument. It is part of something much larger, what we could possibly interpret as a ritual or ceremonial landscape. And this is something what I would like to discuss throughout the whole this paper, and uh, draw our attention to different examples or different manifestations of such a human ritual behavior in space in Western, Central, and Eastern Europe. So many of us are aware of the project or projects, series of projects, which were dealing with the Stonehenge, but not only with the Stonehenge, but with the Stonehenge landscape, studying the death and human communication and human ceremonies in the landscape, and specifically setting the monument of Stonehenge in the ritual landscape. This table is showing basically what we knew until very recently about the development of Stonehenge. Some of the ideas about beginning of this ritual landscape are reaching into the time of Mesolithic Neolithic transition, but at least since the mid 4th millennium, in the early Neolithic, we can see creation of first monumental structures in the landscape. One of the features we will be discussing also in the case of Central Europe are the causewayed enclosures, and I'm specifically going to focus on these types of monuments. But we got also some other types of features in the landscape, such as the great cursors connecting the features in the landscape, or the long barrows as a kind of symbolic expression of the idea of a longhouse, of a typical Neolithic dwelling construction, which was in a symbolic way transformed into the house of death. Also, reaching the third millennium, we can see some rapid development in the area of Stonehenge. We'll be talking about construction of the first circle of so-called Welsh blue stones. And then the further development towards the Bell Beaker period and creation of the most monumental phase of the Stonehenge construction, using the Saracen stones, the more local Saracen stones, which are basically creating the visually most important part of Stonehenge, which is still present and very well visible at the present time. In this paper, I'm basically following the current research of the team around Mike Parker Pearson from University College of London, and also of Timothy Darvill from the University of Bournemouth. As we have quite limited time, I'm not going to go into a great detail of the archaeological evidence quite recently discovered around the Stonehenge. Just it would be interesting to see the attachment of the megalithic structure to the funerary rituals, and of burying of hundreds of people within the enclosure, and also perhaps seeing some kind of expression of the initial stage of a social differentiation, because only some people, including men, women, and children, were actually allowed to be buried within this holy circle, while many other people were buried elsewhere in the ritual landscape or close to their settlements. From this point of view, I would like to especially mention the well-known site of Durrington walls, which was repeatedly excavated, and I would like to emphasize the recent new reinterpretation of the site. It was always referred to as the largest possible known Neolithic settlement site in England. But some recent discoveries are suggesting that even so it was permanently inhabited, it was used mainly as a seasonal work camp or seasonal place for feasting and celebrations, for people who created Stonehenge, who were upkeeping the monument, but also for many people from different parts of British Isles, as the evidence of animal bones is suggesting that people were traveling on a huge distance, as far as from Scotland and northern England, bringing their little piglets and slaughtering them probably in midsummer and midwinter solstice time, especially in the time when the feasting and celebrations and worshipping were taking place around Stonehenge. So just to see the landscape in the so-called Salisbury Plain, which is basically a kind of area which was never fully inhabited, never fully agriculturally exploited, and even at the present time, it was over a long period of time, it was used as a military zone. What is surprising and very fascinating is that we always believe that the Salisbury Plain is a kind of area where we can see almost everything. We can see the monuments on surface, where the remains of many monuments are visible and easy to be described. But the recent non-destructive survey taking place in the area around Stonehenge and Durrington walls, basically along the River Avon, which was probably the most important axis of the region, suggests that there were many other monuments which are currently invisible in the landscape, and which bring a completely new look at the Salisbury Plain as a ritual landscape. I'm referring to a project conducted between British archaeologists from the University of Birmingham and with the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute from Austria. You can see some of the results of the landscape reconstruction, and also the amazing equipment they are using, the mobile equipment they are using for the large-scale geophysical survey. So these are some of the results of the recent non-destructive survey around the Durrington walls and Stonehenge, finding some remains of a long barrows. As I suggested, these are one of the earliest, together with the causeway enclosures, one of the earliest monumental constructions in this area. You can see that the geophysical survey brought up some timber constructions. You can see the reconstruction of the long barrow here, which we still call long barrow, even so there are great doubts about the mound as such. It was possibly a timber constructed house of death, where the remains of at least 60 individuals were stored, some of them cremated, some of them dried or cleared of the soft tissue and crushed and stored in the frontal part of this monument. Okay, can you see the visualization? I suppose you can. So this is one of the most fascinating results of the surface survey. Perhaps the largest Neolithic enclosure known in Europe, with the diameter over 500 meters, which was not known at all. This enclosure was containing also a standing stones, and is surrounding the Durrington walls enclosure, and including the holy river of Avon into this enclosure. So we can quite clearly see the attachment of Durrington walls towards the Avon River was well known even before this survey, but the discovery of this large enclosure delimiting the area around the Durrington walls is amazing. Now I'll continue with the presentation. Looking at a different place, a different site, which is located in Pembrokeshire, in southern Wales, in Prisley Hills, and it's called the site is called the Henge, and it's the original bluestone henge. You perhaps know that again, Mike Parker Pearson has initiated the research in the local stone quarries where the bluestone for Stonehenge was acquired, but not many people actually knew that the monuments in the region were also created by the same people and created by or built of the bluestone. So the Wonmon site was created at about 3400 BC. It existed for few centuries, but then at the end of fourth millennium, people decided to extract the stones and shift them over a very long distance, 250 kilometers, to the Salisbury Plain, to the Stonehenge. You might be puzzled why I draw the line across Wales to Wiltshire, across the land, because it would be theoretically it would be much easier to bring the stones along the coastline, but there were several experiments done in attempts to move these stones along the coastline, and with almost no success. So it's more than likely that they were actually dragged across the mainland. And what is very fascinating is that there is an old legend recorded by Geoffrey of Monmouth at 1136, speaking about the giants' dance, so-called the giant dance stone circle, located originally in Ireland, which was dismantled by the wizard Merlin and shipped to Amesbury on the Salisbury Plain by a force of 15,000 men who had defeated the Irish and captured the stones. So this is the early medieval story of something what in fact possibly happened in at the very early third millennium BC. We don't know if there was any Merlin at the time, but what we are sure of was that these stones were actually transported from Wales, not from Ireland, but from the west, transported obviously by a large number of people. We can imagine the parties of people dragging the stones in some kind of ceremonial pilgrimage all the way to Wiltshire. And there is a Merlin who is basically described as a person from the dark ages of British history, someone from the surroundings of King Arthur, but in fact someone who gained the power of traditions of someone or some events which happened several millennia before his time. This is just showing the evidence of the original Wonmon circle, and also the Stonehenge stage 1, the first phase of the construction of this stone circle. And you can see that by diameter, by orientation, etc., Stonehenge is in fact a copy of already existing enclosure in Wales. Also, some scientific tests are suggesting that the people who are buried at Stonehenge could possibly have, or at least some of them, could possibly have some connotations to Western Wales. Another idea of the Stonehenge as the pilgrimage place is coming from a research of Timothy Darrell, where he is describing basically the site as a Lourdes, as a prehistoric Lourdes, where people with some physical or mental problems were coming and seeking for a healing power of the stones and of the religious holy place. It is not only a place of the healing, as we we found some evidence of burials of people with some kind of physical deformities, but also a place where some people were sacrificed. If you have a time, pay a visit to Smithsonian Channel, where in a few minutes you can observe this very attractive visualization of the ceremony of a so-called Stonehenge archer, a man who was probably ritually sacrificed inside of the stone circle and buried in its vicinity. This is the Stonehenge archer's remains as they are displayed currently in the Salisbury Museum. And the idea that he was actually shot from 3 different sides by arrows is reminding us of the another possibly sacrificed person, the famous Etzi from Hauslabjoch in Alps, which was very probably killed by an arrow, which you can see in this visualization under his scapula, and the discussion about the possibility of his sacrifice is actually connected to the Laces Stela of Southern Alps, where such ritual event is possibly depicted of a man shooting another man into his back. So it might be well possible that this kind of ritual sacrifice was more common all over the Neolithic Europe. And now we are moving to Central Europe, to Bohemia, where I work, and I'm going to present only some results of our current and previous project. So this is the research area we are focusing on. It's about 50 to 25 kilometers oblong, with a kind of natural centerpiece of central landmark of Mount of Sheep. This is the Mount of Sheep. We call it a mythical Mount of Sheep because it is connected to ancient legends about the beginning of the settlement of Bohemia by Czechs. Again, in the time of what we would call Dark Ages, specifically 6th century AD. But as we can see in the archaeological record, the forefather Czech, who was supposed to climb up to the hill and invite his countrymen to settle down in this area, was possibly not the first one of the elite of society in this region. And the legend says he was buried underneath the hill, but we can see that many other forefathers as him were actually buried around this Mount of Sheep in the kind of waterless, slightly elevated plateau, which we consider to be a ritual landscape similar as the ritual landscape of Salisbury Plain. So what is the evidence we were following in this region? First, there are Neolithic causeway enclosures dating from the second half of the 5th millennium until the beginning of 4th millennium. You can see the Michelsberg culture enclosure at Kli in district of Mělník. This is the evidence we gain from our excavation, suggesting that this site was never permanently inhabited. In fact, this was a ceremonial area enclosed by this rhythmically interrupted ditches and a palisade, and that this is a ditch which was several times recut, cleared, and reconstructed on a basis of repeated events which were taking place in this ritual area, but without traces, even chemical traces of a permanent inhabitation. So these are the so-called tulip-like beakers of the Michelsberg culture, which were found in the bottom of the ditch. They are usually complete vessels which were used for ceremonial purposes and then crushed or deposited in the ditch. You can see the radiocarbon dates from clay, suggesting the site was in use at the very end of the 5th millennium and at the beginning of the 4th millennium BC. So this is an ideal reconstruction of the enclosure, which was enclosing only one part or one river bank of the Elbe River, and such as it was in Durrington walls in Britain, also here the enclosure is clearly attached to the watercourse, and the river was very probably the deity itself, which was celebrated here. And also we should bear in mind that in a visual distance and in a close vicinity of the enclosure was the mighty Mount of Riep. So this is the area which we were excavating, the area of an entrance, of one of the entrances, as here. And instead of some kind of fortification, we should imagine this place like a place of worship, place of a light constructions, which could have been repeatedly reconstructed and rebuilt for one particular event, and then a new phase of such construction took place in the site. We assume that some of these gates possibly were decorated with bull's heads, with bucrania, which we frequently find in the ditches near the entrances. So yeah, you can see the reconstructions of the cult of bull, and also one of the present day reconstructions of similar shrines. So what's also interesting is the location of these sanctuaries, these enclosures in the landscape. You can see that all of them are in the close vicinity of Riep, of the mythical Holy Mount, but also they are close to the confluence of two important Czech rivers, of Vltava and Elbe, Labe River. You can see the dots are now not exactly on the bank of the river, but the fluctuation of the watercourse in last 3-4 millennia is remarkable. So our evidence is that each of these sites was actually on the bank of the river, either in the case of Vrbno, close to the Vltava River, or Vlíněves and Kli, close to Elbe River. What is interesting that even the C14 dates are suggesting that there was a rather sequence of these sites which were created from the earliest site of Vlíněves. Then there was Vrbno, and finally in the Michelsberg period, Kli. So for the Jordanov culture, it is Vlíněves and Vrbno, and then for Michelsberg culture, it's Kli. Well, these distinctions by the name of Michelsberg or Jordanov are only related to some basics of a pottery typology, but in fact, we can see these were possibly the same people who took in turn of creating these shrines, and we can believe that maybe in a similar way as in Durrington walls, people were traveling along these rivers from a far distance, from many communities, gathering at some special events, particular times of year, gathering here, but then abandoning the place for some time again. This is all about this confluence area, and we have published a book about the ancestral arenas, which are basically these enclosures. So I should speed up. So these are some examples of human bones being deposited in these ditches. It is the evidence from Vlíněves in central Bohemia, but also the examples from southern Germany from the Michelsberg sites with human remains. And also we should emphasize the variability of the burial rites of the Michelsberg culture, where there is a wide range of different treatment of a human remains, including the primary burial as excarnation, the secondary burial as deposition of a defleshed remains in the different contexts, but also in the ditches of the causeway enclosures. I have already mentioned Bucrania. Bucrania are important already since the beginning of Neolithic. We can see the example of a Chalcolithic representation of bull's horns, or the most remarkable example from Kerma from Sudan, but also in Germany, or in South Germany, or in central Bohemia, in Czech Republic. We can see the traces of Bucrania being deposited near the entrances to those causeway enclosures. And the tradition of Bucrania is known also from the folklore architecture of Anatolia, and it was also depicted on the classical Greek architecture as a protection of the temple. And finally, we should mention the drinking rituals, the evidence of a drinking vessels and drinking feasting, which is well known from the European context, and also, let's say, from anthropological data as well, and which are important part of the Neolithic religion. So in this kind of conclusion of the Czech evidence, we should mention the communication between amongst the living and with the ancestors. We can see the funerary rituals, sacrificial activities, and ancestor cult in the case of the ancestors, but also we can see how these enclosures were used for the living communities, starting with worshipping, ritual exchange, bride wealth, cattle breeding, feasting events, etc. So we can see these ancestral arenas as something very important in the 5th and 4th millennium BC communities for their communication and social life. When I mentioned the importance of the Říp area as the ritual landscape, this is one of the depictions of the burial of the forefather Czech in the landscape under the Mount of Říp. And we can see the accumulation of the funerary sites of this particular period of long barrows, which is basically the 4th millennium BC. And then I can tell you that there is abundance of a 3rd millennium funerary sites in this area, which is overrepresented in relation to the settlement sites record. And this is one of our most recent discoveries, a long barrow with a timber shrine in the frontal part. This is the main burial of a archer warrior with 12 quartzite arrows, and the female burial of a corded ware period, which was inserted into the already abandoned or partly destructed long barrow. So basically, there is the 5th and early 4th millennium BC represented by causeway enclosures, where the death and the relationship between human beings is presented in a kind of public way, then between 4000 and 3000 BC, we get these long barrows representing rather familial, private and intimate relationships between the community or family and ancestors. And then the third millennium, which is characterized by individual burials underground barrows, emphasizing the personal gender identity and creation of natural shrines, which we are not going to talk about. But this Mount of Reap was very probably one of these worshipping places. At least we can say a few words also about the Trypillia culture. To many of us, this is very well-known phenomenon. From the point of view of a Czech archaeology, I would like to emphasize the investment of Čeněk Chvojka. In Ukrainian language, he was called Vikentij Vyacheslavovič Chvojka, who at the end of 19th century and at the beginning of 20th century lived and worked in Kiev. And he was the first person who excavated and also gave a name to the Trypillia culture. This is just basically setting the context of Trypillia culture, and I would like to draw your attention especially to these Trypillia megasites in the area of Southern Bug and Sinucha River, where we can see these huge, the evidence of huge megasites. There is a list of some of the biggest sites with the largest evidence of dwellings, and some more data about the area covered and the presumed number of inhabitants. I have to admit that majority of archaeologists are amazed by the numbers of inhabitants which are predicted or which could be expected to live in such areas. But at the same time, I need to offer an alternative explanation, which is connected to the knowledge from, for example, from Durrington walls, but also from these causeway enclosures in Central Europe, because we know that these sites were not permanently inhabited, only maybe by a limited community. And I believe that this might be the case also for some of these Trypillia megasites. We should mention that there are a huge, for example, this is the Majdanecké site with the occurrence of a collective large buildings, which could be interpreted as temples, as shrines. And we can imagine that people were actually keeping their huts, their dwellings on this site, even during the time when they were not attending the celebrations. And this obviously needs to be tested in the field with the material, with targeted projects, as the evidence here in Trypillia megasites is suggesting a really like a intensive use of the site, with loads of animal bones, with loads of ashes and burning evidence. But this all could be also connected to an intensive use during the ritual gatherings. So I would, these are the, for example, the mega buildings in mega sites, which are reconstructed as a two-story buildings of a really massive construction. And this is just an idea that in the first half of 20th century, in some parts of Europe, it was common to hire a wardrobe box or a little cottage at your favorite swimming pool place, and you kept that place for whole summer. You were storing your towels and stuff there, but for the winter period, you abandoned this place, and you returned by the early summer next year, and you possibly hired the same cottage again, same box again. So maybe this is how we can explain the existence of such unusually huge accumulations of dwellings in the Trypillia megasites. Also, we should bear in mind this habit of burning houses, which could be connected to ritual practices, but also possibly to some kind of hygienic treatments of the area, which could have been polluted with some kind of diseases. And from this point of view, it is important to mention this forest steppe zone, which was always connecting Ukraine to the eastern part of Europe, but also to Central Asia and Far East. Some of the remarkable evidence of a cultural exchange is being recorded around 3300 BC between the Cucutanean Trypillia culture and the Yangshao culture in the area of a Yellow River. You can see it could be very easily exchanged for some of the Trypillia decorations. So we can see the cultural exchange, which is continuing even in the later periods, and some of the very similar types of pottery and similar types of decorations between the Trypillia and Yangshao culture, and also some of the symbols, such as here you can see the yin-yang motif being actually depicted on the model of a Trypillia shrine, Trypillia temple. And then all this, the communication with the Far East and Central Asia, and also the maybe even temporary eventual gatherings of people in one enclosed area was a very useful or very helpful for the spread of the first pandemic diseases in prehistory, such as the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the Black Death, which is recently recorded in many sites of the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age in different parts of Europe and Central Asia or Near East. And the Trypillia territory is one of the regions where possibly was kind of a melting pot of these influences of diseases which were possibly traveling along the steppe forest zone of the Eurasia. So thank you for your attention. Slava Ukraine, Gerojem Slava. And also thank you to everybody who is willing to donate for this a very, very good purpose. Slava Ukraine.